Hi everyone, this is Dr. Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hi everyone, welcome to today's exciting podcast. We're talking about the trot, and we thought that we'd explore a little bit about certain gaits, specifically the trot. Like we've looked at a bit on the backup, and we've just discussed some aspects that you can look at when your horse is walking. But I find the trot really valuable for when I'm especially doing in-hand work, because it shows up brace and it also shows up their ability to hold themselves in self-carriage. So I'm excited for this episode. How are you going today, Soph?
Hey Raquel, I'm going really well. We're going to be looking at aspects of what makes a good trot, what kind of things trot when you have dysfunction, and how you can go out and have some time observing your own horse and make some good insights about how they're moving, especially in the trot.
Yeah, and I always work with my horses in hand, and that's with very limited gear. Like often it's just a cavesson or a halter. And so I really want to see, how they're carrying themselves in that position. And also if they can't hold themselves in the trot on the long line without me on them, then they're going to have a lot of difficulty with me on them, like with carrying me. So just in enhancing your observation skills is always so valuable. So what are some key aspects of just the trot in general?
So the trot is one gait up from the walk and a gait down from the canter. And you can have a diagonal trot. So it can be a diagonal gait. So that would mean that your left hind and your right fore hit the ground at the same time, ideally. And then your right hind and your left fore hit the ground at the same time. So it's a 2-beat gait, and that's a diagonal. You can also have a pace. So you can have the right fore and right hind hitting the ground, and the left fore and left hind hitting the ground. And that's commonly seen in paces, sometimes standardbreds, and it's actually very cool to watch, especially sometimes a young foal next to mum. It's interesting to see if you haven't seen it before, but the most common way that you're going to see that 2-beat gait is in the diagonal.
Yeah, and then with the normal trot, there's the 2 beats, but then there's also 2 phases of suspension in between each of those. And that's a really, valuable aspect to observe, because what happens with a lot of horses is they lose that suspension. And it's pretty common in older horses. And so it can be difficult to see with the naked eye unless they're a warm blood, because they are really good at floating. And having those obvious moments of suspension. But in other breeds of horses, like your thoroughbreds, they're a bit flatter and the suspension is not as pronounced. So you're looking for, like what you said, the diagonal, but then in between each diagonal, there's a moment of suspension where all legs are actually off the ground. And, we're not going to kind of go into all the different trots, like collector trot and things like that. We just want to get down the basics of just a normal trot. So the other aspect to that is that the spine and the head and the neck should be pretty still. And so if you've got a head that is going up and down, then you've probably got a lameness. If you've got a head that's kind of bobbling or twisting to one side with one certain diagonal, then you've probably got a lameness. So we want the head and neck to be in front of the sternum. It's pretty still, and the spine is fairly still in a dynamic way. Like it doesn't have, in the walk, we have quite a lot of motion. That's the most motion through the whole spine is in the walk. But in the trot, it kind of moves more as one compared to the other gaits. So yeah, anything else you'd like to kind of add there? What other things can we look at with the trot?
So you can see generally that it's a lot more elastic than the walk. So you've got your tendons and your suspensory ligaments going down, in your lower limbs, and they become utilized a lot more because you basically spring down into them. They catch elastic energy and then they release it, and that helps to propel your horse forward, as well as the other elastic systems like your thoracolumbar fascia and your latissimus dorsi coming down into the limbs. So often, it can look super flashy and really fun. It's beautiful to watch sometimes, and they've got this big motion, but what you really want to be able to assess is, what does the spinal stability and what does the core function look like, and what does it look like when your horse has good strong motion but they're not braced through the body.
Yeah, and I think the trot really does show up areas of brace. Like Ellie Mae, she's had a real challenge with her trot. So she's obviously a young horse and I'm just starting, and the trot has been an area that she hasn't had a good trot for quite some time. And what I'm looking for in a good trot is that the abdominals are lifted and engaged, which supports the back, but they're not braced. So there's no line across the belly. Like they look like they're lifting, and what that does is then it means that the back is quite well supported, and so you'll have, in a healthy, well-functioning back, it will actually there'll be a little bit more upward motion than downward motion, and there's very little downward motion in it because your spinal stabilizers are working and your core is working, and so it's really supporting that back. You'll also see good flexion of the joints. So like that's where you get the most flexion of the limb joints, which you mentioned with the tendons and the elasticity from there. But you'll get the most flexion of the joints in the trot. So if a horse doesn't want to trot, sometimes it's because they don't want to flex a carpus or a hock. But they should flex, and they should flex under the body. That should be where you get the most maximal flexion. So your knees, your carpus will come up to the same height. Your hocks will come up to the same height. And you can see there's a flow of energy through the joints in that flexion and extension motion. Like there's not one joint that looks like it overflexes or it stays straight compared to the other joints. And then you mentioned an overload, with the suspensory and that whole suspension system of the fetlock. If the upper body is not supporting well, so you don't have good spinal stability, good core stability, good thoracic sling, good pelvic support, those fetlocks will sink more, and you'll actually get more overloading of the lower limb joints because you don't have good stability through the upper body.
Absolutely. And yeah, you often hear that, it sounds hard and loud, even when you're on surfaces where you shouldn't it shouldn't be so loud, like on grass. You often hear them slap, like it sounds like they've really hit the ground quite hard. And I do notice that often when you're meeting a horse for the first time and you just realize they're soft with their foot placement too. It often, then you do an assessment, you're like, oh, you're actually functioning quite well.
Holding yourself up. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. What do you see in the pelvis? What kind of motion are you looking for?
Yeah, so in the pelvis, I'm looking at the tubercoxy and the sacral tuberosity, depending if you're looking from behind or from the side. And so in the walk, we have a figure of 8 kind of motion happening, but in the trot, it's quite just an up-down motion. And I'm looking for that to be even from side to side. And I'm looking that it's actually there and that it's pretty even in its up and its down. So there's not like an excessive up on one side or an excessive down on the other side. And I saw a little pony the other day, and she initially at the trot, no pelvic motion. And I could see the left hind wasn't okay, but no pelvic motion. And then after treating her and like getting that treating the pelvis and getting the pelvis moving, and this happens, then the lameness became really obvious, like to the point that it was almost a hopping lameness. So actually freeing up the pelvis then showed me, no, the problem is not just with the muscles, it's not just with the pelvis. And then on further assessment, she had quite a lot of stifle pain. So if you see a pelvis that's really holding in the trot, then often I'm wondering, what's underlying? Like when I take that off, what's this going to show up? Because yeah, that's a big one for me from the pelvis. So you want just a nice up and down even motion, so both sides even, and that there's not one side rolling forward or rolling back or lifting higher or lower.
Right.
What about the
So
legs? What do you see in the legs?
So in the legs, you can have a look at your A's and V's. So that is where, if you can imagine that, let's say your two front legs, at one point when the left foreleg is as far forward and it's just hitting the ground, and then the right leg is as far back as it's going to go, and the toe is just starting to lift off the ground, you'll see a shape like an A that goes between one foot up to underneath the chest and then back down to the other foot. And so that is your A shape. And what you want to be able to see is that that A shape is similar as you can have it be when the left fore is forward as when the right fore is forward. So you look at the shape, the A size. So you want to look at the width of the A, whether or not the length of the stride is symmetrical. And you also want to have a look at the shape in there. You know, when the knee bends or when the fetlock goes into dorsiflexion. So when it leaves the ground and it goes up and forward, do you have the same shape through those joints as they're moving? So you can have a look at that A shape in the front legs and in the back legs, and you can do the same. So you can have a look at how the fetlock moves, and you can have a look at how the hock flexes in that A shape. And then you can have a look at your V's. So if you imagine that your right front leg is currently at the point where it's just about to leave the ground, so it's back underneath the horse's belly, and the right hind leg has come forward and it's just about to hit the ground, you know, so your right front would be just about to lift and your right hind is just about to land, you know, approximately in the hoof space. You have a V shape where you go from the elbow down to the ground where the front foot is on the ground, and then you go from the back foot just beside it all the way up to, you know, the hip joint or, you know, your stifle area. You'll see a V shape there. And what you want to be able to see is that that V shape is similar on both sides of the horse. And so sometimes that will show up that one hind foot is traveling further forward. So it might track in front of the front hoof spot where it's on the ground. So, you know, you can see the little hoof imprint and where it's going to land sometimes if you're on dirt or on grass or sand. And so you want to have a look at the left side and the right side and see if they're symmetrical, and just assess, you know, is one V bigger than the other side, or is one forelimb being left further back on the ground and it takes longer before it picks up and comes forward than opposed to the other side. So there's lots of information that you can get from those A's and V's.
Yeah, they're really valuable in walk and trot, to look at stride length. And then also, and the other thing I would say there is make sure you look at it from both sides, because you think it might look the same, but it really often doesn't. And also, if you can stay fairly level with the horse, so as they're trotting, because obviously as you get further behind or in front of the horse, which can be valuable when they're on the lunge, because you can kind of stay even with them when they're on the circle, but being on a circle versus straight can show up different things. But yeah, if you're watching them trot in a straight line, try to go with them, so that you can really see that stride. Like I teach my horses to trot on the long rein in a straight line, and I think that's such a valuable skill to have for lots of reasons, but it also shows up their balance. It also means I'm not stuck doing circles on the ground at a trot. It means I have to walk, so it's really good for my fitness as well. But it's also good if I then want to put them over poles, or I want to put them over a jump, or like this morning I was playing with Ellie and she would trot in, walk just before the bridge, walk over the bridge, trot on, and we could do like a straight line. So that's really valuable. If you're looking from front to back with the limbs, then you can also observe this on the circle as you get good at observing it. We want to look at, are those limbs in alignment through the swing phase, the non-weight bearing phase, and the stance phase, the weight bearing phase. So, you know, for example, what you might notice if you're looking behind a horse is they're trotting, and then you see the right hind, when it's in the air, it comes in and then it lands out. So it could land in alignment, but it swings in the trot, or it swings out. It's not as common, but it can also swing out. So you want to look at, are the front legs and the back legs aligned? You know, for example, Ellie recently, she has a bit of a funny right front leg. And so it's actually improving a lot recently, but she swings that out. And so in the trot, there can be more of us like, I'll watch her trotting towards me in the paddock, and you'll see her swinging that front leg around. So ideally, I'd like that to stay in a straight line with the back legs in that trot. So that limb alignment's really important.
And if you're considering the back motion, you know, lift without brace, how would you describe that motion? Because it's, you know, we're trying to describe like a still motion without brace, a little bit of dynamic motion. How would you describe it to somebody?
Yeah, I guess nothing is ever completely still in motion, right? Like, and I really observe the back when the horse is trotting. So what I'm looking for is that the back muscles are not under tension, so they look pretty smooth through the back muscles, and that goes with the abdominal muscles too. Like the belly is lifted, but it's not bracing. There's no lines there, and there's a slight upward, gentle bounce of the back, but it's like it's an upward bounce, not a downward. You know, so there's a little more upward motion than downward motion in a really nice trot. And so, for example, like Ellie, previously when she's been trotting, she's had a big downward motion, especially in her lumbar area, like from thoracolumbar to lumbosacral, and then the pelvis is disengaged, and her head and neck is lower, and her stride length behind, so her A's and B's are reduced with her hind limb striding. So that all kind of goes together. Henry, when I used to work him, this is one of the reasons I stopped and retired him, was because his back, especially going maybe left, he had a right stifle issue. He would actually, you'd see the lines of the muscle on his back. So there'd be a line going from the tubercoxy, like kind of along the rib shelf, and sometimes another one a bit higher up, which is basically the junctions of the longissimus. And so you just see that like tight, 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 tight. And so if you're seeing that back tighten, and the muscles along the back tighten, there's some pain, dysfunction, lameness somewhere. I want to see a nice, softly uplifting back that then will engage the legs.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know that the ability for the back to be comfortable and engage is going to allow you to have consistency with your gait changes, moving from, you know, walk into trot, and also your downwards transition, and then trot into canter, and then back down as well, because in the deceleration phase, your core is so valuable for being able to absorb the motion as your body is traveling forward and through onto your forelimbs as well. So the ability for your back to not have to jerk or jolt. And you see that when horses come down, particularly, out of the trot into the walk, and it just feels like you've almost seen an arrow travel from the top of their croup down towards their sternum, and they've had to really pitch forward and catch themselves, as opposed to being able to catch themselves and engage nicely.
Yeah, a good quality. I mean, transitions could be a whole discussion in itself, because like the quality of your trot will lead into the quality of your transition up and down, and it really will show up their ability to engage their core appropriately. So that's that's really, really valuable through there. I also look to make sure that the lumbosacral area is not bracing as well. So, sometimes the back might not have obvious lines of brace, but you can see the brace in the lumbosacral area. And then what will happen is there's like almost too much movement in the pelvis. So it's just unsupported. So there's like too much up and down motion. There's not a flow of that motion through the body, because if one area is braced, another area has to move more, because the same energy is still going through the system. And so if you've got brace in the lumbar, somewhere else has to take up that motion. And so often you'll see it might be in the pelvis, or it might be that they're just tipping really onto their forehand, and so they're taking it up in their front legs or their fetlocks in the front. And so, yeah, we're looking for that kind of. And the other thing I was going to say is, when they're trotting beautifully, and if you see all these things on the ground, like the back's lifted, the pelvis is moving nicely up and down, they're lifting through the base of the neck, which we haven't kind of talked about, but that's another important factor. They've got a good diagonal stride, they've got limb alignment. It is easy to ride, like so easy. And they actually carry you. Like, you don't have to push them. You don't have to encourage them. You don't have to put their head and neck into a position. And they actually feel like they're pushing from behind, and they're carrying you. And if you don't have a horse that can carry itself on the ground, they're not going to carry you any better when you're under saddle. You'll just have to compensate for them and hold them in the frame and help them and help them and help them, because it's not an efficient motion for them.
That's in trying to find out, what are people really asking questions about in the trot. If you even just pop into Google search my horse's trot, the list of questions that come up are: why is my horse's trot so bouncy? Why is my horse's trot hard to maintain? Why is my horse's trot so hard to sit to? So, questions about managing the motion are really common for people, but a really great pathway is to improve the motion for the horse so that they are really stable and strong, and there isn't excessive motion and it's not overly braced. And then you're going to have a much easier time having a consistent way of meeting them too, because if you've got a horse who's sometimes braced but sometimes maybe feels a bit better or a bit different, then you're always going to be adjusting.
Yeah, and then you have to work really hard to maintain that. And something you said then, so you said that if they with the jumping into the trot. And so often I find with horses that jump into the trot, there's a restriction in their thoracic sling. So like under their scapula, like they can't they can't like lift. So that can be one part, or they can't push with their hind limb and like take that transition up into the trot. So, and then the other one you said was they feel bum high. So Henry used to feel like that. And I'd say if your horse is like, yes, there are bouncy horses. Like, I recently asked a friend who's a high level dressage rider, like I rode a client's warm blood. I'm like, how do you ride that? And she was like, well, you need a lot of strength, core strength, and you need to support yourself. You can't lean on them. But there's naturally horses with a lot of suspension, like there are a lot of warm bloods like that. But then there's the horse that kind of bounces you out of the saddle almost. So like, or they swap your diagonal, so you're going along and you think you're on the right diagonal, and then all of a sudden you're not. Those two things are indications of an underlying lameness, if they're doing those two things. So just keep that in mind. They should feel, you should be able to maintain the diagonal, and that they shouldn't feel like they're kind of like hitting you out of the saddle.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
in that line of thinking, if you are going out to assess your horse's trot, what are the things, in terms of dysfunction that might pop up and somebody can observe in their horse?
Yeah, like you said earlier, the sound is really valuable. And some people are, it depends also what your observation skills are. Like some people are able to hear better, some people are able to see things, some people are able to feel it. Like I know some people are like, I need to hop on the horse, to be able to feel it. So you've got to go to your strengths initially, but train your other senses. So if you're listening, you can listen for the sound, and you might even hear that it's now gone from a 2 beat to maybe you can hear an extra beat in there, or they're just loud with a certain leg or a certain diagonal. If you're observing them, I would take a video, because what's really beneficial with the video is you can take it back, put it in slow-mo, and really have a look at the balance of the legs. So the unison of the legs, like is that diagonal exactly moving together, or are they landing a little early with the front foot or the back foot? Because that's also, there was a post going around on Facebook last year, or maybe it's gone around a few times, about the single-legged trot, and there's like really flash warm bloods doing this single leg trot. It's not a normal trot, and because we're promoting this really fancy schmancy movement, that we're kind of pushing them out of some of their natural gaits. So we need to be mindful of that. So if you video it, especially on a straight line, from the side, then it can give you a bit of more information. What about the head and neck carriage?
So if you are finding that your horse is always holding their head quite high or always holding their head quite low, then that's a sign that they're using their head and neck as a lever to brace or to shift their weight around, rather than, coming back to our idea of a beautiful trot with a nice engaged core and a lifted base of the neck, where you've got the ability to adjust. They might bring the head up for a little bit and then adjust as you're moving or turning, but to have it up all the time or low all the time is a sign that you should be considering the quality of their spinal stability and their core especially.
Yeah, like Patch, when I first was trotting with her, the pony that I had, she just wanted her head on the ground all the time. And that was where her point of balance was, forward. So she did not have to utilize that hind end. It could just kind of trail along behind her, and hopefully not beside her, that would be weird. But behind her. And for her to get balance in the trot, I was constantly asking her for moments of lift, and then it wouldn't take much and she'd get tired. Like it was a building of that hind limb strength and the core stability and all of those things. So, and Jelly, he used to do long and low, but the same thing, like he'd just drop on the forehand. We had a podcast about recognizing long and low, which is really beneficial. Ellie's interesting because she lifts the base of her neck, but she kind of pokes her nose forward, which means that she can still tip forward and not engage her hind end. And so with her now, it's like she's got this beautiful neck carriage, but now she has to kind of lift it all back up and bring it all back together and then bring that hind end underneath her. So yeah, that head and neck position, what we want is that the eye is neutral to the hip joint and that they can kind of hold in that soft, neutral, expanded position, and that they're not tipping forward or got the head and neck up and then, you know, kind of the balance is tipping back. So looking for that front to back balance as well.
Definitely. And of course, you're when you are looking at your front to back, how post-legged is your horse moving through that, you know, coming back to what is the quality of the limb action like? Is it choppy? Is it very straight? Are they avoiding their flexion through their joints? Is really valuable. Also, what you know, thinking about head carriage being high and low, and you've just talked about Ellie having a nice ability to kind of telescope a little bit, but on the other hand, having a braced neck is something that pops up. You know, is the horse really managing their motion by just setting their head and neck? Is it hard for you to ask them forward into the contact, or is it hard for you also to ask them to come back a little bit into your hand as well? You know, are they just stuck in a very fixed position? And then poking the head and neck out further than what is ideal. So not a nice telescope like what you're describing with Ellie, but you know, do they just set it out and forward, tip over onto their front legs and not have the ability to come back and engage? And that in itself, when you're if you've taken a video and you can come back and watch the hind limbs moving, where do they land underneath the body? So sometimes when you think it looks like they're really bringing their leg underneath them, but you'll actually find that when they land, their foot is only hitting, you know, a little bit in front of the hip joint, and when it's really out behind and they pick the leg up off the ground to bring it forward, that's when you get the most flexion of the hock. So it looks like they really bring it up, and sometimes it looks like the hock stabs up towards the tail, like it just kind of pokes up behind, and then they bring it up under and through and then put it down quite flat. So having a look and making sure that your engagement behind is there is really important.
Yeah, definitely. Like the amount of swing in front of and behind the hip joint is really important. So what you see with a lot of horses is that there's more swing out the back and less swing, like what you're saying, coming under the body. And we want that to be a fairly balanced, and that creates a really nice shape of the hoof arc as it kind of goes through, and it's balanced, as opposed to like there just being more swing out the back. And like I was saying to you before about that, I just started doing a little bit of trot poles with Ellie, and that before it was really difficult for her. She wanted to stop, and she definitely wanted to keep those hind limbs out behind her. And this is a problem with using trot poles as a rehab, is that a horse has to be doing appropriate biomechanics with especially the hind end and lifting, flexing and stepping over the pole, not just kind of letting it lift behind the body and then it kind of comes over the pole, but it's coming over the pole with the pole behind them instead of like under their body. And today was the first time that she actually started to lift those hind legs forward. And it's really amazing, you know, at 6 years old, 5.5 years old, we're like getting improvements. So that's a really important thing. Like when you're going over trot poles, don't just do the trot poles. Actually look at where the most flexion of the limb is, where they lift it, if it's underneath and forward or if it's out behind them. And then with the front legs, you know, how do they reach, and do you have an even front to back movement? And one other thing I just wanted to say is that also when they land, and this is probably easier to see with a video and slowing it down, what I've seen too is that when the horse is landing and as they kind of push off, there should be a strength in that push off. Like the limb should be fairly, especially the forelimb, it should be fairly straight as it comes into that push off, and then it breaks over and then it flexes So what it means when I say break over, like the hoof goes over the toe, and then they flex the foot. But what you'll see sometimes is the foot is still bearing weight and the carpus is flexing. And so that's not a strong support place to push from. Like they're pushing through that last part of the stance phase. And if, as they're pushing through, the carpus is buckling, then you don't have a good kind of support system. Like I noticed with Ellie today, there was a few times where as she's landing, and this was just in the walk, but as she's landing, her carpus wobbles a little bit forward, like it has a little bit of flexion. And for me, that is not a state, like there's a neurological brachial plexus issue there that, you know, she should be strong in that push off. There shouldn't be a little buckle in that leg. So that's another really valuable reason to take some video and slow it down.
Yeah. Awesome. If you were going to name 2 to 3 key takeaways then, you know, coming out of all of that, those very valuable points, what would you say are the, you know, the real crux of keeping a good trot or monitoring your trot or wanting to improve your trot?
I would say, do you have flow in your transitions up and down? Because that'll also tell you where your trot is at. And are the muscles of the back and the core smooth but engaged? You know, so is there a lifting, slightly upward motion of the back with a lifted abdomen without any brace lines? And the third one I would say is, where is that balance, you know, of the eye to the hip? So does it look like they're leaning forward? Or does it look like they're kind of holding themselves in a horizontal balance? So they're probably my 3. What about you?
Just that, probably looking for uniformity in your steps. If you've got an inconsistent stride length, inconsistent, you know, landing of your stride, then that's something to really think about, you know, in the body. Having a look at the motion of the pelvis. So seeing, do you have that tubercoxy motion that you were talking about? Is it nice and smooth, a little bit up and down, but not overly jerky? And what does it look like from left to right? You know, just to get a gauge of what your pelvic motion is like through the stride. And then your head placement. So, you know, all the things we talked about, is the head and neck braced? Do they hold it too high or too low? Or do you have a beautiful, nice soft motion of the neck where the lower cervical bones, so the base of the neck, look quite healthy? They can lift a little bit and your head and neck is open and adjustable.
Yeah, awesome. So I hope that you have gained some observation insights for your horse's trot, and you can go out and see what you find. And it's always a work in progress. So just know that whatever you find, there's always, you know, possible means of improving it. So thank you for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler and Sophie Vandenberg, in today's podcast. Enjoy your horse time. Please subscribe to the Equine Functional Posture podcast so you don't miss our weekly episodes, and give us a 5-star rating so we can share more valuable insights.
And we will see you in the next exciting episode.